This is the 5-minute guide to the Scharnhorst class, armored cruisers of the Imperial German Navy. The Scharnhorst class consisted of a pair of ships, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, and their combat record would be the direct cause of the names given to the later 11-inch armed battle cruisers we covered in the second guide. The ships were armored cruisers. In the period leading up to the First World War, cruisers were not divided into light and heavy cruisers, but rather into protected and armored cruisers. A protected cruiser generally had lighter guns and no side armor, but was protected by a curved armor deck near the waterline, and by its coal bunkers to keep the engines and magazines safe. An armored cruiser generally was larger, carried heavier guns, and was designed with belt armor much like a battleship, although in the pre-dreadnought era they could often be longer than actual battleships due to the engines and fuel needed to sustain their high speed. They were designed to be flagships of overseas squadrons and to be able to defeat anything that wasn't a battleship or possibly a better armored cruiser. The Scharnhorst class carried a main armament of 21cm guns and a pair of twin turrets, one forward and one aft, along with 4 single turrets, 2 on each side, for a maximum broadside of 6 guns. 6 guns of 15cm caliber and 18 of 8.8cm caliber plus 4 torpedo tubes, all in single mounts, completed the ship's firepower. With a 6-inch thick belt and a speed of just under 23 knots, they were the last Imperial German armored cruisers built as battle cruisers began to replace the armored cruiser in the major navies of the world. In 1908 both ships had been commissioned and were assigned to the East Asia Squadron under Admiral Maximilian von Spee, and were noted upon deployment to be well trained in gunnery. Although the rest of the squadron was dispersed across the Pacific, the start of World War I saw them all coming back together to prevent them being picked off alone by numerically superior British and French forces. However, when Japan also declared war on Germany, they realized their force stood little chance against the full might of the Japanese Navy, let alone the other allied forces in the area. So after assembling all the warships and supply ships he could, von Spee decided to try to head across the Pacific and back to Germany via South America, attacking any shipping he could find on the way, as this route was considerably less well protected than going west. As the flagship, the Scharnhorst led the way, and after bombarding a small French colony and attaching the protected cruiser Emden for its own legendary commerce raiding spree, they headed east, arriving off the South American coast with the military strength of the squadron consisting of the armored cruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau and the protected cruisers Dresden, Nuremberg and Leipzig. Opposing him, the British had 2 old armored cruisers, Good Hope and Monmouth, both due for scrapping except for the outbreak of war, the modern protected cruiser Glasgow, the armed merchant ship Otranto, and the old pre-dreadnought battleship HMS Canopus. Whilst the majority of this fleet was really more a moving scrap pile than anything else, von Spee acknowledged that he could not win if the Canopus was present. It was immune to anything he could throw at it and could sink his ships with its own main guns. However, a number of factors changed the balance of power. The Canopus was so old it could barely make 12 knots. Its chief engineer was mentally ill and in the middle of a progressive breakdown, and the whole squadron apart from Glasgow was crewed by retired officers and reservists with little training. The Canopus was only there because the much more modern armored cruiser HMS Defense had been diverted when it was supposed to be reinforcing the squadron, and was running late, and in the end Canopus was so slow it was left behind. Unsurprisingly, the modern, faster and better trained German forces utterly crushed the British squadron. The Glasgow and Otranto escaped, the former by running once the Good Hope and Monmouth were knocked out, and the latter by retreating early in the battle, when it became obvious it had no chance of accomplishing anything. However, the victory was tempered by the knowledge that the Germans had used a lot of irreplaceable ammunition. Von Spee decided to take his ships to attack the British base at the Falklands before making for home, but the British weren't going to let their first major defeat since before Trafalgar go unavenged. When the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau approached the Falklands, shells began to fall. The old Canopus had been beached as a guardship and was firing over concealing land with the aid of spotters. This forced the Germans to break off the attack, but also bought time for the British reinforcement to get up enough steam pressure to pursue. The Germans found that the battle cruisers Invincible and Inflexible, along with the armored cruisers Carnarvon, Kent, and Cornwall, the protected cruiser Bristol had been sent to destroy them, accompanied by the surviving Glasgow and Otranto. The battle cruiser had been designed for exactly this kind of fight, and the two British ships gradually overhauled the Germans with the rest of the reinforcement following. Von Spee ordered his smaller vessels to make a run for it and turned to face the oncoming force with the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. Showing why they were noted as such skilled ships, the pair scored numerous hits on their larger opponents, but it was not enough, and eventually 12-inch shells began landing mortal blows. Scharnhorst was hit badly and turned to cover the escape of her sister, but it was not enough, and as she rolled over and sank, the British went on to sink Gneisenau, then Leipzig, then Nuremberg. The Dresden escaped for a time, but was eventually also tracked down and sunk. With them went the last active warships of the High Seas Fleet, not confined to Germany. Whilst they fought bravely and with honor, they ultimately were fighting a war which had surpassed the armored cruiser technologically, a lesson the British would not learn until the Battle of Jutland. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or favorite ship, leave a note below.